Happy Sunday to you. A couple things I would just say as we kind of dive in. One of our core values here at the church is, thank you so much, Bob, is that we say that we work hard for the gospel. And so, and there's some times in the life of the church where that is more true maybe than others, or where that maybe that we always are working hard for the gospel, but sometimes it's just like feeling it. And this week has been a little bit of that. And on two fronts, okay, on two fronts. So one is that we, as you can tell, the building looks so cool. It's like you're in space. But we're just going to turn off the gravity soon, but we're going to leave it on just for this part. And so it feels like, in all of this, it takes so much work. I mean, you just walk around. I think sometimes you just think things happen, but they happen by people working hard. I'm not kidding. There were people here every single day this week working hard for the gospel, getting this ready for this week that we're getting ready to have, our block party. That's what the shirts, you see some of those around. So like that's what it takes to pull something like that off. And so that's happening, which is always a big week, always a big week. And then coupled with that, we removed the walls in our office complex this week as well. So we demoed all of the walls over there. And the reason why we did that is because as we were approaching the fall, we discovered in the spring that we kind of ran out of space on that side of the building. And so we have a long-term solution that you'll hear about probably in November, but we needed to come up with a short-term solution if we wanted to continue to help people know Jesus better in that space. And so what we did on this week was we knocked all the walls out. And so there's pictures of the staff, and you can rest assured that those are all staged. There were other people that came and made it really happen. And there was a group of teenagers. I'm not kidding. There was a group of like 20 teenagers that just showed up. And they got all the walls, them and Carrie Smith, got all the walls removed in one day, which is crazy. And it's a lot of work. Yeah, Jason, you clap for them. Just let Jason do it. It's okay. But no, it's cool. But here's the thing, like, it's worth it. That we work hard for the gospel because the gospel's working hard. And it's because of this thing that we're going to look at this morning, and it's that when Jesus Christ, when he came into this world to give himself for us, he gave it all. There was nothing that he held back when he gave himself for you, so it's worthy of all that we could ever give him. And really, as we're looking at the conclusion of Mark's gospel, we've got a couple more weeks and we'll be done, we see just the extent to which Jesus was willing to give everything for you. And as we come to a text this morning, you see something interesting happen that happens sometimes, it happens sometimes where people who were enemies unite for a common goal. Like, usually when the goal is great and they need help, people are willing to unite with people who maybe they didn't like before that. When I think of that concept as a whole, I cannot help but think of 2010 LeBron James, okay? And I know, like, whatever. In 2010, he played for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the best player on his team was a guy named Anderson Varejao, and he's as good as he sounds, okay? Like, I'm just saying, he's not very good. And his last name is, whatever. And so he was looking at his team, and he's like, man, there is no way I can win a championship with these fools. And so what he does, he famously goes on TV, and it's something that ESPN aired called The Decision, and you might remember the quote. He says, I am going to take my talents to South Beach. And what he was doing in that is he was joining forces with people who, before that moment, were rivals, Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, and then he spent the next 4 years winning 2 championships on his road to becoming the greatest player to ever play basketball. And so that's how it started. I said that at ninth or the first service, and no one said anything. And then afterwards, 3 people told me I was blaspheming. So like whatever. But you guys wouldn't let me do that. I appreciate that. But it happened. He joined forces because the goal of winning a championship was more important. And what happened, where we're at in the text this morning, okay, is that last week we looked at Jesus standing trial before the Jewish leaders, the Sanhedrin. And as he's standing trial before the Sanhedrin, what they did is they convicted him of being guilty, and not only being guilty, but they convicted Jesus of being deserving of death, which is all fine and good, but the problem is that the Jewish Sanhedrin does not have the authority to kill anyone. So if they want to kill Jesus Christ, then what they need in that moment is they need Rome to help them. And that's where we pick up this morning, is with this group of people who have decided that Jesus deserves to die, but they don't have the authority to kill him. And so they go to the person that does. We'll pick it up in Mark's gospel, Mark chapter 15 and verse 1, and it says this. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and the scribes and the whole council. And they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. Now, this is picking up where we left off, and so it's kind of like the meeting. It starts off, the first part of this verse is the meeting after the meeting. They've convicted Jesus of being guilty of death, and now they're just kind of like making sure all their ducks are in a row. So they meet, just to make doubly sure that this is what they're supposed to do. That's what's happening there, where it says they convened again. And so that's happening. But not only is that happening, but what they're trying to do here is they're trying to create an image as they bring Jesus to Pilate, the person who has the authority to kill Jesus or to let him live, is they're trying to create an image of Jesus to Pilate that would communicate that Jesus is more dangerous than he is. And I would just draw your attention there, it says they bound him. Now, Schnabel in his commentary talks about how they would have done so. That what they would have done is they would have put Jesus in an iron collar and attached chains to his hands, and they would have just been like chained like that. Creating an image that as Jesus is going to Pilate, that he's far more dangerous than he is. I mean, mind you, a week ago he was teaching in the temple courts. He's not dangerous. But what they want Pilate to think is they want Pilate to think that he is scary. Because when you chain someone up like that, I mean, it only naturally creates a visceral response. Reminds me of the time I did a wedding in a prison, and I was there, and there was this part where I go back to do the ceremony, and they kind of check you in, and the door behind you closes, and you're in prison at that moment. Like, there's nothing you can do to escape, you can't leave, like, the door is shut, and it's locked, and I'm standing next to someone who's in chains. Now, like, I could have, so what are you in here for? I'm here for a wedding. Like, I could have done that, but that wouldn't have made sense. And in that moment, I'm like, honestly, I'm sitting there next to this guy who's chained, and I'm thinking, what in the world am I doing? I can't leave? Like, I don't know what the guy did. Like, it's the image. That might have just been protocol. I don't know. But the fact that he's in chains, it created this response. And that's what the Jewish leaders are going for with bringing Jesus to Pilate in that way. They want him to be scared of Jesus when he comes, when the truth is he has done nothing to warrant being chained in that way. But they know what they're doing. So then they bring Jesus to Pilate. And what we see in the next few verses, we see Jesus stand trial before Rome. He's already stood trial before the Jewish Sanhedrin, and now this is his Roman trial, and it says this. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered, "You have said so." And the chief priests accused Jesus of many things. And Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. Usually when someone is standing trial, they defend themselves. There's an accusation made, and this is why that's not true. And what's the picture that's being conveyed there in those few verses is accusations are being made, and Jesus is just not responding. And if you look at what's happening in the text, it's pretty fascinating. So last week, when we looked at Jesus being convicted before the Jewish Sanhedrin, if you don't remember, what he was convicted of doing, the reason why they thought he was worthy of death was because he committed blasphemy. The chief priests, they looked at Jesus and they said, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Are you God's Son?" is what they were saying. And Jesus said, "I am." and they tore their clothes, they screamed blasphemy, like it was a crime against Israel's God. Now, here as he's standing trial before Rome, if you notice, they don't say that he's committed blasphemy. What they're convicting him of is saying he was the king of the Jews, which is different. What they're trying, because I mean, if you think about it, okay, Pilate is a Roman governor, not a Jewish person, not religious. Matter of fact, history shows us that he hates the Jewish people. So why would he care if someone blasphemed Israel's God? And the truth is, he doesn't care. But you know what he would care about? Someone making themselves king. What he would care about is someone saying, I'm the king of the Jews, and I'm going to take over Rome by force. And that's the image that they're trying to convey. That's what they're saying. This is what Jesus did. So they're like, we convicted him of religious blasphemy. Now we're going to try to convict him of political blasphemy. And it's so fascinating, because what is Jesus, how does he respond to this accusation? Kind of halfway answering it. He says, well, you've said so. And if you think about the Gospel of Mark, one of the things that has happened throughout the Gospel of Mark is that the Jewish people, by and large, were frustrated with Jesus because he wasn't going to be the type of Messiah that made himself king in this world and took over Rome by force. That time and again, when that happened, when that would be brought up, Jesus would be like, no, that's not what I came to do. And here he is, with his life on the line, basically being convicted of a lie that he could have verified was a lie. And his response is, you've said so. It's kind of like he's saying, yeah, but not like you think. And then they keep making more accusations, and Jesus doesn't say a word. Doesn't defend himself, doesn't give reason why they're wrong, doesn't give reason why he shouldn't be in this situation, but he just sits there and he takes it. There are many ways he could have ended this whole thing, and one of them would be just speaking in this moment, but once he was captured in the garden, he was resolved to his fate, and he wasn't going to do anything that would cause him to not go to the cross. So, he's like, well, you've said so. And to not say anything is basically an admission of guilt. So he's convicted. And as he's convicted, what comes next is interesting. It's something that Pilate would do for the Jewish people during the Passover. And this is what happens. It says this. Now at the feast, Pilate used to release for them one prisoner of whom they asked, which seems just like a very strange tradition. And among the rebels in prison was one who had committed murder in the insurrection. His name was Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. Hey, release us a prisoner, is what they're saying. And he answered them, do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. What Pilate's doing here is he's being a politician. And what politicians do is they pander to the crowd. He's pandering to the crowd. He's trying to figure out, okay, did they bring Jesus to me because everybody hates him, or is it just because they hate him? Because what Pilate is not concerned with is he's not concerned with doing the right thing. He's concerned with the crowd not turning on him. And so as he brings these two, like that's why there's no justice in that. He's like, I'm going to release to you the more popular one, not the one who does what is right. And so you have this moment where he's like, I will release to you this man, Barabbas, or I will release to you Jesus. And we know that he's pandering to the crowd for a couple reasons. One, if Pilate thought that there was any chance that Jesus would be able to lead an insurrection against him and overthrow the throne, he's not releasing him. He's not going to give that option. So he clearly doesn't think that it's that's even plausible. But you know that that's not even what he's concerned with either, because what did Barabbas do? He led an insurrection and murdered someone. So he literally did what they're accusing Jesus of, and he still releases this guy. It's all about what the crowd wanted. And it's so interesting because even as that's kind of what's happening here, is you also, you see that Pilate, he is such a politician. Because what do politicians think? They think that the people love them, right? You got to be kind of vain. You think that people love me. That's why I'm going to do this. And so he that's what he thinks. And so he underestimates the value that the chief priests have over the crowd. And that's why they're able to stir up the crowd and say, give us Barabbas. And he also thinks that he's probably more influential. He doesn't realize that the Jewish people, well, they hate him. They hate Rome's presence in Israel or in Jerusalem. That's the last thing they want, is a Roman prefect ruling over them. And so you got these, he comes, he brings these two people before the crowd. One of them is someone who tried to overthrow Rome, and one is Pilate's choice to be free. Well, they're not going to pick Jesus simply because they want to stick it to Pilate. And so you have this underestimation of that's all that's happening. And while all this is happening, one of the most ironic things is going on. If you look at the name Barabbas, okay, it means Bar Abba, son of the Father. Jesus is the Son of the Father. Barabbas is just named that way. Jesus actually is. Okay, and then you think of the irony of the moment, okay? So that's happening. Then the irony. This is a picture of the atonement. Okay, this is the picture of how Jesus Christ takes our place. Think about it. What was Barabbas guilty of? Insurrection, trying to overthrow Rome. He was guilty. He did it. He murdered someone when it was happening. Absolutely guilty, deserved to die. Then you have Jesus, okay? What is he convicted of? Insurrection, trying to overthrow Rome, something that he absolutely never tried to do. And he trades places with Barabbas, just like he does with you and with me. Barabbas goes free, just like we do. Jesus pays the price. They picked the wrong son of the Father, but they didn't realize it was for their own good. So as this is happening, then you see something that is really interesting, because what's going on here is that you see the crucifixion, the idea of Jesus being crucified. You see it the person who makes that decision process it in real time. When we think of the crucifixion, we think, well, yeah, some of you are probably wearing cross necklaces. You think of Jesus, you think of the cross. But as it hits Pilate, that wasn't what he was thinking. Look at this. And Pilate again said to them, then what shall I do with the man you call King of the Jews? If he's guilty, what do I do? And they cried out again, crucify him. And Pilate said to them, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, crucify him. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas. And having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Where it says, why? Wrapped up in that, Pilate's saying, he's he hasn't done anything to deserve that. Like, in the first century Rome, like, crucifixion wasn't like the only punishment for crime. There were other options they could have done. They could have banished him. They could have subjected him to a life of public service. They could have chained him. I mean, they could have sent him into exile. So, like, Pilate's like, why would we do that? Why would you want that? It's like it's his way of saying, guys, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. But the more that he said that, the more they shouted. The more intense it became, and so you see there where it says Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, he gave them what they wanted. If you guys want this guy to die, if you want him to be crucified, then okay. We'll do it. And just to think of the humiliation that must have been for Jesus. Think about it. So, he feels everything the same way we feel. That the people he came to save didn't want him, they took a criminal instead. Think of every time in your life that you were not picked for something and how that hurt. Because of the fact that you're in this room, I'm assuming that your life wasn't on the line when that decision was made. His was. The people that he came to save would rather him die than him go free. That's crazy. And not only that, but the people that he came to save, when given the option to determine his punishment, they gave him the worst one of all. They didn't even think about it. And the more that they pushed against it, the louder and more intense they got. And one of the details of this text that it would be very easy to just gloss over because of the fact that it's just like one little fragment of a sentence there, but you can't miss, is where it says they scourged him. And so this is what they would have done to him before he was delivered to be crucified. And the scourge, I have a picture of a scourge on the screen, that it's basically a stick with pieces of leather on the end. And then on the end, attached to those pieces of leather would have been pieces of metal or pieces of bone. And that when it says they scourged him, they hit him with that. And most people believe that it was 39 times. And so just like the severity of a scourging, that it was not uncommon for if someone would have been scourged in that way that they would die. Not uncommon at all. It's also not uncommon at all that if someone experienced a scourging like that, that they'd be crippled as a result of enduring that type of beating. And so you have Jesus experience this humiliation of not being chosen, and then right after that, this physical pain that is probably worse than anything we've ever experienced. You think this would be a good time for it to be over? But it just gets worse. Look, verse 16. And the soldiers led him away inside of the palace, that is the governor's headquarters. And they called together the whole battalion, and they clothed him in a purple cloak, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. And they began to salute him, "Hail the King of the Jews!" And as they were striking his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling down in homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him and led him out to crucify him. That now we are literally on the road to the cross. And it's one last piece of mockery that they're doing to him before he goes. Really experiencing the depths of agony that a person could feel. That what they're doing here, it's a mock coronation. It's kind of like reminiscent of playing a game with a child, right? Playing pretend. When you play a game of pretend with a child, it's fun, it's playful, but when you do this to an adult, it's just to humiliate him. That everything that they are saying here, with this, is they're saying, Jesus, you think you're king, but you're not. And they're just adding salt to the wound that he would feel. I mean, they put him in a purple robe. Purple is a sign of royalty. I mean, so they're saying, hey, this is what a king would wear, but you're not. They put this crown of thorns on his head, and not only is it a fake, it's like mocking him, saying, you'll never wear a crown, here's one of thorns, but also that would have hurt because the thorns would have been pushing on his brow. And then they pretend that he's king, and they bow before him, really just to humiliate him, because clearly they don't believe any of that's true. And I would just remind you, as we look at this, and as we think about it, everything they're saying in mockery is absolutely true. He is the king. And the thing is, everything that he's experiencing, he's only experiencing it for them. He could stop it at any moment. And just to let that sink in, I want to read to you something that Jesus said in Matthew's gospel, okay? That right as Jesus is being taken away, Peter slices the guy's ear off, and Jesus says this to Peter right after he sliced off that guy's ear. He said, do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? Jesus is saying, I could stop this at any minute. That if it was about winning a fight, I will win. But it's not about me winning a fight. It's about me going to the cross. That's what I came to do. And so everything that he's enduring, he feels it just like you would feel it. And he has the power to stop it, but he never does. And I think about this text, and I think that you have three groups of people that we've kind of interacted with over the last couple weeks who had the opportunity to make Jesus king. I mean, because that's what he's convicted of. Ultimately, he dies for saying that he's king, and they don't believe that he is. And you have three groups of people who had the opportunity to make him king, and they chose not to. And they all had their reasons that if we really think hard about their reasons, there's a really good chance that we make the same decisions for the same reasons. I mean, if you think about it, you got the chief priests, the religious people, the religious leaders. They could have made Jesus king. When he stood trial before them, they could have been like, you know what? I think this guy's the king. I think he's the Christ. But they didn't. Why? They didn't because they didn't believe him. They knew when he was convicted, it was like, are you God's son? Are you the Messiah? And Jesus is like, yeah, I am. But they chose to kill him. They convicted him of blasphemy instead of making him king because they didn't believe that he actually was. And I think there are probably people in this room, people watching online, that the reality of your situation is that you know what he says about who he is, but there's something where you're like, I just don't know if I believe him. And if that's where you are, this is all I would say to you this morning. Make sure that you're really confident in that decision if you don't believe him. That Jesus Christ came into this world to pay for your sins. That when you put your faith in Jesus, you trust that he paid for those sins. If you don't believe him, then you're left to pay for it yourself. And if you think of the totality of the sins that you've committed in your life, you become very clear of one thing. There's no way you could pay it. You'll spend eternity trying to pay off a debt that you'll never be able to pay. When the reality is he came to pay it for you. So they chose not to believe him because they didn't believe him. They didn't make him king. The other person that could have made him king was Pilate. Pilate could have made him king. But he didn't because he cared more about the crowd. His whole thing was like, I don't want the crowd to turn on me, so I'm going to do whatever they think is best. And so he doesn't. He had all kinds of options, and one of the things in the text that it shows us is that while Pilate was a politician, while he was committed to pandering to the crowd, there was at least a moment where he was close. And you see it in the way that he responded to Jesus not giving answer. If you notice there, it says Jesus made no answer, so that Pilate was amazed. That word amazed, It's the same word that's used throughout Mark's gospel when Jesus would do a miracle in front of a crowd. And what Pilate's doing is he's kind of responding to what Jesus is doing in the moment, the same way that the crowds responded to Jesus' miracles. They were amazed, but they didn't let it transform their heart. And the reason why Pilate doesn't let Jesus transform his heart is because he knows what it will cost him with the crowd. And if you were to think about your life, and you were to think about the reasons why you just are reluctant to jump all in when it comes to your faith, I would bet that at some level, the thing that is holding you back is something about what people are going to think. You're like, I would do this, but man, if I do this and they're going to think this, so I'm just going to kind of hold off because I don't want people to think I'm weird. And you're doing the same thing Pilate did. You're not making him king because you're more concerned with other people than what's the truth. And then finally, you think of the people mocking him, specifically the soldiers at the end who were mocking Jesus. They could have made him king. The word this is that there was a battalion of them, meaning there was between like 500 and 1,000 of them there. If they wanted to make him king, they could have probably done some damage by force. But they didn't make him king, and the reason why they didn't make him king is they thought he was too weak. You don't mock a strong person. You mock someone that you think is weak. And so they thought he was weak. But what they couldn't see was that his weakness was totally for them. That the reason why he was subjecting himself to everything that he's subjecting himself to was so that he could do for them what they could never do for themselves. And really, when you think about the totality of the cross this week, it shows us an incredible picture of what we get from what Jesus did. And just think about it. What happened to Jesus twice? We saw the last 2 weeks, we saw Jesus was convicted. That the most innocent person who has ever lived stood trial and was found guilty twice. But why was he convicted? He was convicted so that you could be free. Because someday you're going to stand before God and you're going to deserve to be convicted, but he was so that you aren't. That we get to be Barabbas, we get to go. But it's only because he was convicted. Not only was he convicted so that you could be freed, but he was beaten. That Jesus Christ was beaten. That he was spat on, that he was hurt, that he endured a level of pain that would kill most of us. But he did it for us. That he was beaten so that you could be healed. That what his wounds do is his wounds bring you salvation. That when we come forward and we pray for needs, the reason why we believe that Jesus hears us is because he was broken for us. That it says in 1 Peter, that by his stripes we have been healed. That his blood was shed so that yours doesn't have to be shed. You see that he was beaten so that you could be healed. You also see that he was rejected. Like Jesus was rejected. That he was given the opportunity to be set free by his people. But what did his people do? They chose to reject him. They said they wanted nothing to do with him. And the reason why he was rejected, it was so that you could be chosen. So that when God would look out of heaven, he wouldn't see your sin, but he would see Jesus. And because he looks out of heaven and he sees Jesus, he wants you. But that only comes because he was rejected. And then finally, you see he was mocked. Which we should be mocked. He was humiliated. He was brought before his people, and they made fun of him, and they spit on him. They put this fake crown and this robe. And they did that so that you could be glorified. He did that so that you could be glorified. So that someday you get a crown. Someday you get a robe. Someday you get to be exalted. And the reason why you have that to be yours is because of what he went through for you. Why is he guilty? He is guilty because they said that he was king and he wasn't in their eyes. So as I think about this service, I'm like, how do we respond to this? I think you respond to a text like this where no one thinks he's king by saying, he's absolutely king. And so I think the best way for us to respond to this text this morning is to stand up and to sing the song that he is the king. And so if you would stand with me, we're going to sing this just to declare that he is the king, that they were wrong and we know what they didn't. Jesus, you are king. And where the world misses it, God, we just pause to say that we see it. That it's true. That everything you endured for us, and it's because you're the king that we truly need. And so, God, our response to this message this morning is to declare that that is who you are, that you are our king. That, God, we give you our lives, we give you our hearts. And, God, we pray that we wouldn't miss it in the same way they did. We love you, Jesus. It's in your name. Amen. Amen. Love you.
Thanks so much for checking us out online. I just hope that whatever you saw, that it was a blessing and an encouragement to your life.
And if you'd like to give today, there are two ways you can do so. You can text your amount to 84321, or you can go to giving.nlspringfield.com and give that way. And if you'd like to join us in person, we'd love to have you. Our service times are at 8, 9:30, and 11.
And if you're new, the first Sunday of every single month, we have an event called Party with the Pastors, which is a great way for you to get to know us, and it's a great way for us to get to know you. So we look forward to seeing you there.